I was reminded of a story that I heard once about a gentleman who was overwhelmed by life. All of his troubles and all of the pressures and his health and everything. He said he seemed like the world was just against him. That everything was just going, everything he tried to do, he was a failure. He was, just bad luck all the way around. And one night he knelt down on the side of his bed and he prayed and he asked God to take this cross away. Please God, this life that you've given me is just too much. I can't handle everything that you've given. And he knelt there for a little while in silence and he heard nothing. So he climbed up in the bed and he went to sleep. And while he was sleeping, he had a dream or a vision that Jesus came to him. And Jesus says, my friend, he says, I've heard your prayer and I've come to help. He says, so bring your cross and follow me. So he follows him to this warehouse, right? He opens up the door and they walk in and it's a warehouse full of crosses. Now you got to imagine this is one of those places like in the movies. It's a little bitty building, but when he walked in, it goes on forever and ever. And he says, I want you to set your cross here. And he said, I want you to look around and find a cross that you think is better. Find that one that you think that you can bear. So the guy starts walking around and he's looking, and it's kind of like one of them department store things, with the posters and all, and he's moving crosses and they're stacked all against the wall and in the aisles, and he walks and walks forever, and he's looking and looking and looking. He comes back and he's kind of depressed and he tells Jesus, he says, I haven't found anything yet. And Jesus says, well, that's no problem. Keep looking. And then all of a sudden he stops and he says, wait. He says, that one. That's the one that I think I can bear. And Jesus looked at him and he says, are you sure? He said, yes, that's the one. He said, now you do realize that's the one you came in with. Have you ever had that moment or that time in your life where you just felt like everything was against you, that your prayers wasn't being heard, and your aches and pains and all of life was just against you, and there's just no way to go but up, right? You see, as Catholic Christians, we have to know that Jesus is calling us to offer up our sufferings for someone else. In the gospel today, right, he tells us to take up our cross and follow him. To deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. He wants us to take the things that happen in our lives, those things that we suffer, and offer that up for someone else. That's what he's calling us to do. As a hospice chaplain, I kind of have this kind of a wall that I can build when I go to sit with a patient. Not to show so much emotion, right? Well, there's one story, one patient that I was sitting with one day, and the first thing he asked me, now you have to picture this man was on oxygen. We were kind of pumping air into his lungs. He was struggling to breathe. And he looked at me and he says, Deacon, he said, I would appreciate it very much if you could serve in my funeral. And I just can't tell you how humbling that is when someone asks that question. And then he kept on talking, and I was trying to get him to stop because, he's struggling to breathe, and he says, this is where the lesson comes in, right, for me, because this man taught me so much in this little bit of time. He says, he says, I hope that the suffering I'm doing benefits someone. And my wall came crashing down. Because this man taught me so much about that redemptive suffering. He taught me so much about offering what we're going through up for someone else. Because it wasn't about him. And it's not about us. You see, I walk every day, right? And my knees hurt when I walk. And I have learned to offer that up for people who can't walk. But they keep telling me if I keep walking, then I'm going to feel better someday. But it's not to say that if we have aches and pains or that we're just supposed to ignore it or offer it up. Sure, we need to go to the doctor. If it's something that's not natural, we need to take care of that. But while we're going through it, we can offer it up. We can surrender those things that we suffer from for someone else who is less fortunate, because we are truly blessed. And you see, we had an example of offering that stuff up, because Jesus didn't carry his cross for himself. He carried it for us. Jesus wasn't nailed to the cross for himself. He did it for us. And then he tells us, if we want to be his disciple, we have to take up our cross daily and follow him, to do what he did, to offer those things up for someone else who needs our prayers. You see, in the beginning of the gospel, he asked, who do people say that I am? He's asking us that same question. Who do we say that Jesus is in our lives? Do we have enough faith in ourselves, in our Christ, in our Lord, to say that we can offer those things up for someone else? That we can put ourselves aside and pray for others? Because he's there to help us. You see, and only that way can we really know who he is and be able to answer that question for ourselves. Who do we say that Jesus is?